This program is designed to provide general information with regards to the subject matters covered. This information is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, sponsors, or station are engaged in rendering any specific and personal, medical, financial, legal, counseling, professional service, or any advice. You should seek the services of competent professionals before applying or trying any suggested ideas. The information contained in this podcast is intended for informational purposes only and is not a substitute for individual professional legal advice. The podcast information was carefully compiled from vetted sources and references. However, R.O.S.E Resources Outreach to Safeguard the Elderly cannot guarantee that you will not fall victim to a scam. Let's talk about scams. It's the must-listen show for anyone who wants to protect themselves and their loved ones from scams. Every Tuesday at 8 a.m. Pacific Time on K4HD Radio, Joyce Petrowski, founder of R.O.S.E, and her guests will provide valuable insights and practical tips on how to recognize and protect yourself from scams. And now, here is your host, Joyce Petrowski.
All right, welcome back, everybody, to Let's Talk About Scams. I'm your host, Joyce Petrowski, president of R.O.S.E Resources Outreach to Safeguard the Elderly. You can go to our website, roseadvocacy.org, and find more information, more resources. You can sign up for our email and or mailed newsletter. You can also find our social media links. And you're going to want to click on the events tab. We have an awesome third annual Golfers for Senior Protection tournament coming up in Phoenix at Arizona Grand on Friday, April 11th. We are still looking for golfers, sponsors, donation items, and volunteers. So reach out if you need any more information on that. And now I want to get into our topic today. We're going to talk about pig butchering scams and psychological techniques that scammers use. And I'd like to introduce our guest, Dr. Martina Dove.
Hi everyone.
Good. How are you, Martina?
I'm good. Nice to see you again and nice to be here.
Thank you. I appreciate you being here. So you wrote a case study, a white paper on scam techniques in pig butchering scams. And so that's what I wanted to talk about today. So I guess let's start with what is a pig butchering scam? I'm finding a lot of people have not heard of that term.
Yeah, so a pig butchering scam is a very clever spin-off romance scams. It actually combines what used to be a financial type of scam, how victims would typically be scammed in a financial, kind of like scams and frauds. And then it incorporated a romance scam element. And what I mean by that, there is, in a typical romance scams, a grooming component would last for many months. And
Okay.
this, serves to groom the victim to comply at some later stage. So it enhances trust, it enhances the emotional component, you build friendship, even when there's no specific romantic element to it, there's a friendship building up. And that obviously will lead to greater compliance. And so like these financial scams that used to be much quicker, that would persuade people to invest, have now become a little bit more weaponized in terms of just building the trust up front, which then pays off at a later stage.
Got it. Okay. And I just realized I forgot to ask you if you could introduce yourself and tell us how you became such an expert on these scams and senior scams in particular.
Yeah, like I'm really a psychologist, by education. I studied psychology, and then for my PhD, I really wanted to do something around how people, kind of how people make decisions and what they're influenced by. And I was specifically interested in the Barnum effect, which is a cognitive bias. And a Barnum effect is something that happens to us where, let's say, there's a fake clairvoyant telling you your fortune,
Right.
how you process that information that you get. And typically you will get information that is very vague, that can apply to anyone, but you're going to think that this is really true of you.
Ah,
So I was really interested in the Barnum effect, and I didn't quite know how to apply it to, a problem in a society until I read the paper that talked about the psychological influences in phishing emails. And this is where I
okay.
got really interested in fraud, and I ended up doing a PhD around scams and how scams persuade, and also what makes people vulnerable to scams. So what are our factors and personality, points, or, what kind of things about us make us vulnerable to?
Got it. And you actually wrote a book on it. Why don't you
I
tell
did.
us a little bit about the book?
Yeah, like when I finished my PhD, because it was a quite, like it was still a really novel arena, and a kind of novel topic, and there was some literature on it, but it wasn't easily found, and I had to piece together from other psychological literature. What I wanted to do, I wanted to create a book so that it's really easy for people to read and find out everything that could make us vulnerable to fraud, and also how scammers persuade. So I kind of pulled all of my studies into the book, and I've added to it some research on deception and how, like if a scammer is communicating something to us, what are some of the things that persuade in that communication, as well, and how to really think about, things around fraud, because people think that this would happen to other people who are not
Right.
maybe smart, but I think it can happen to everyone. And really,
Mhm.
scammers vary. Some are very sophisticated, using very sophisticated techniques.
Yeah, absolutely. And the name of your book is The Psychology of Fraud,
Okay,
Scam, and Persuasion Techniques.
that's right.
It's an awesome book. I have it. I've read it. I've gone back to it and looked at things at various different times. It's available on Amazon if anybody's interested in getting it. And I think a lot of people immediately go to the financial aspect when you're talking about scams, and we need to draw more attention to the psychological and emotional effects, because if you can understand that, I think that's going to help you, in addition to a lot of the different protection tools, right? To be able to have less risk of falling victim. So let's get back to the pig butchering. So we know
Mhm.
that you said that's a they've sort of weaponized the romance scam,
Mhm.
and they're not, in essence, from start to finish in 2 to 4 hours on the phone with you. They're taking their time to go through a grooming process.
Yes.
So they're still targeting the same as they would for any type of scam. Is that accurate? Because I've always said everybody's a target, right? Scams don't, there's no intelligence component to it, no
Mhm.
fun, you know, if you have a lot of financial assets or don't, it's everybody's a target. So are scammers in essence looking for specific characteristics when they're trying to do this pig butchering scam?
Um, I don't think they are. I think, like, whereas romance scams used to be very targeted to people maybe on dating sites, or maybe
Mhm.
people, there was a rationale behind. It's very difficult to study scammers as well, because they don't
True.
want to talk to you. But the rationale behind the romance fraud was typically they would target, let's say, women or men at a certain age where they're likely to be divorced or where they're likely to be single. They would target dating sites where they
Mhm.
know people are looking for partners. So there was some kind of targeting. Like phishing emails, less so. They would be a wide
Right.
cast net. Some phishing emails are more targeted than others. If they targeted the CEO of a company or somebody in a
Right.
company to phish the
Yeah.
company. But I think with the pig butchering scams, what's happening, it's kind of, they're trying to cast the wider net and see what they catch. And
Got it.
I say that because I've looked at several of these communications, and what's smart about them is that they adapt to the victim. So, for example, if a victim is receptive towards the more romantic aspect, the
Oh,
scammer
okay.
is going to play on that. If the victim isn't open to that, but it's open to, let's say, receiving a financial advice, they will
Hmm.
be playing up to that. So it's very adaptable scam that I think starts with like a fake, a fake text, like pretending to be a wrong number and engaging you in conversation. It starts very friendly and then picks up the cues from the victim as to what they may need out of this conversation.
Yeah. I can't, you mentioned, a possible way it starts is the fake text, right? A
Yeah.
wrong number. I can't tell you how many of those I've gotten where the text message comes through and it's like, I'm looking forward to getting together tonight. And it's like, okay, I have no clue who this person is. Or, just I've been trying to call you and, can you whatever, right? Or they'll even put a different, they'll just put a name in there, right? Hey, Julie, how's it going? Right. And
Yes.
it's like, okay, that's
Yes.
not me. It's a wrong number. And a lot of times you want to be nice and you want to respond back and go, I think you have the wrong number, but you can't do that because one, that lets them know that that number's active, right? And there's somebody behind it, but then they're going to start with their techniques and start like the conversation, right? To drum up a conversation.
Yeah, no, definitely. One thing that I would say, I think so much of our information has been hacked from legitimate sites,
Yeah,
and I think like when they're targeting you, they almost always know it is a live number of some sort.
got it.
But
Okay.
I think like what is fake, like I'm calling it a fake, it's a real text that arrives, but it's
Right.
pretending it's a wrong number. When you receive this text, what they want to do is they want to engage you in a conversation, and they're playing on a very known persuasion technique, like firing social norms, like what you've said. You want to be polite, you don't want somebody to be waiting somewhere thinking they contacted their friend, so you're going to respond. And
Right.
then the key is to actually engage you in a conversation. So the scammer may say, oh, I'm really sorry, please forgive me, I thought it was my friend. You're going to say, oh, don't worry about it. Then they're going to say, so where are you based? And they engage you in this like really benign conversation. And that's another persuasion technique, because the more you engage in any kind of conversation, the harder it is to stop replying.
Yeah.
So it's a known persuasion technique called commitment and consistency. We want to be you know really consistent. We are nice persons, so we don't want to not reply, and then we keep replying, and then like maybe they'll ask you a question, you'll reply politely, you'll want to kind of like cut the conversation, but they'll try
Hmm.
and try and try. So it's a really clever way. It's a like originally it's a cast, to cast a really wide net, see what they catch, and then it starts from like small kind of conversation. Maybe that day you're going to exchange a few texts, the next day they're going to text you again, and so on and so forth.
Right. Because the more you engage in the conversation, the more comfortable sort of and
Yes.
committed, right, you are. And they're going to say, thank you for letting me know. And you're going to be like, oh, you're welcome. Not a problem. Right. It just
Yeah,
kind of keeps
exactly.
going back and forth. And then before you know it, you're finding personal information out about this person and they're asking you
Yes.
questions and right just to kind of get you in
Yes.
deeper and deeper.
True. And like how these conversations start, they start usually they're about you. So you want to, like, you tell them about you, you feel like this person is just like interested in me, and that
Mhm.
kind of like builds a bit of a bond. And then they'll typically start to mimic what you're telling them. So if you're telling them, let's say I'm divorced, I have one child, it's really difficult to raise the
Mm.
children, they'll
Right.
say, oh yeah, me too, like I'm finding it hard, so a lot of the time they will mimic who you are. And that's another persuasion technique called similarity. You praying
Oh, okay.
something that, like, you're finding something in common, right? And we like people that have something in common with us. We bond quicker with people that we find we have something that is this,
Right.
similar, or we're finding similar
Exactly.
struggles, or we have things in common we can talk about. So like sometimes when people see these conversations, and especially these things are happening to their friends and family, and they can't understand why somebody would engage in that, there are a lot of persuasion techniques that are layered one upon another, even when it just
Okay.
seems like this is a random conversation.
Right, right. One of the things you mentioned in the case study is controlling the conversation. So is explain that a little bit more. I kind of look at that as, and I probably am just on the surface of this, is that if you fail to reply, or, it's been a day or something like that, that they're going to keep texting you to keep you in that conversation.
I mean, yes and no, that's one component of it. But
Okay.
one of the things that I've noticed when I read like a year's worth of, WhatsApp messages back and forth, if you don't even look at what's being said, you're just looking at how the conversation flows between two people. In the beginning, the scammer is the one that's initiating very frequent conversations. Several times a day, they will switch you to WhatsApp, where, maybe they'll change your phone number so that if they're abroad, it's cheaper for them to do that, or more people can actually use that. Like I'm pretty sure in these organized crimes, units, you're not just talking to one person, you're talking, somebody's
Right.
managing your profile, right, about you. And they're very smart. They keep a profile on you. They know exactly what you told them, and I know that because I engaged in a conversation just to see, and I tested them,
Okay.
information I gave them. So basically, in the beginning, they initiate a lot of this conversation, and it's really mundane. It's about, how's your day going, what do you have for lunch, what did you do today. It's very pleasant, it's very easygoing, it's very lighthearted, and it's very frequent. And there's another, persuasion technique, because over the electronic communication, we open up way too quickly. Like we wouldn't,
Yes.
first of all, the scammer has access to you several times a day. This wouldn't happen in real life. You just
True.
wouldn't be going out with somebody 5, 6, 7, 10, 20 times a day, right? Like you wouldn't be
Right.
calling them 20 times a day. You would think something's wrong. But the text, right, serves as
Yeah.
that. It reinforces the feeling as if you've known this person for longer, right? So
That
that,
makes sense.
yes, it makes
Yeah.
sense. So, like, these conversations are very frequent. They initiated by the scammer, and then as they go along, maybe a month has gone by. They now starting to introduce the idea of investment. Maybe you don't want to be investing, and you don't know why somebody's talking to you about investing in crypto because you've never done anything like it. This is where the scammer kind of like is still priming you. They're just talking about maybe their wins, and how much they won on investing in crypto or investing in
Right.
some other stuff. And the more you don't engage in that conversation, the more likely it is that a scammer is going to now start to withdraw their attention on you, right? That
Okay.
at this time you've gotten used to having this contact for months, right? And this is your friendly contact through the day, and you're going to miss it if it's gone
Exactly.
suddenly.
You're looking forward to it.
Exactly. And scammer suddenly starts taking that away from you, right? So when they do get in contact, it's very quick. Very quickly, they'll talk about investment. If you don't start talking about investment, the scammer will say, "Hey, I need to go. I'm going to have lunch and go to work," and they'll withdraw. And pretty quickly, the conversation that goes on starts to only be about investments.
Oh,
Otherwise, the
okay.
scammer withdraw themselves. So if you think about like, I kind of always like to say to people, remember when you're, like maybe you start going out with somebody and they're very attentive to you and you get
Yes.
used to that.
Yes.
And
Uh-huh.
suddenly they're not as attentive, they don't call you anymore. You start being anxious, right? And that's the
Exactly.
goal.
Yes.
That's the goal. That's the goal. It's the goal is to make you anxious so that then you're persuaded to talk about investment to keep that conversation going.
Got it.
Once you start talking about investment, it becomes more normal to you to start thinking about investment, to start like thinking you could maybe invest, because now you're afraid that if you don't invest, you will lose this friendship or this relationship you built with this person you're building. And then pretty soon, if you're still not going with investment, sometimes the scammer then turns nasty. Sometimes they'll just drop if they see that you're not going to be a victim. My scammer dropped me because I just didn't have the time to communicate several times a day.
Okay.
But sometimes the scammer will turn, quite negative. They'll
Oh,
start berating you that you are not a person of your word, or, like
wow.
in my case study, the victim had to defend themselves, right? Like, saying like, I do, but I just want to be cautious. I don't want to invest 500,000 straight away.
Right.
It's not that I'm not proactive, or, so then the situation turns more negative, and that will cause more anxiety. And then the victim may just think, oh, look, I'm just going to invest because I want to stop this negativity now, right? Not only are they not communicating like they used to, now it's really negative and the relationship has turned bad, and they just want to get
Wow.
back to that good place, you know at the beginning.
Wow. That's very sophisticated,
Very sophisticated.
right? They're getting you to go in through a lot of different ups and downs and a lot of
Yes.
different emotions,
Yes.
right? Because right, when someone starts turning things negative and it is an inference on us, right? Your first tendency is to defend yourself, right?
Yes.
You can, if you stopped and thought about it, you might think, well, who is this person really? And
Yes.
what does it matter to me if they think that I'm not a person of my word? I don't
Exactly.
even know
Exactly.
them, right?
Exactly.
You're
Exactly.
just automatically go to, well, I have to defend myself,
Yes,
right?
you go to that, and one thing I would also say, which is really important, you go to that defense thing, but also you don't want to disappoint them, right? Like
Mm,
maybe in the beginning they got you to tell them what kind of person you are, so they're gonna then throw that back in your face. That they'll say, well,
oh,
you told me you're this kind of a person, and now you're showing me this. And then again, that's commitment and consistency. We want to be consistent with what we say. People who are saying one thing but behaving in a different way are seen as inconsistent and unstable. We don't like people
okay,
to be inconsistent, right? And
right.
another thing that I've also noticed, happens a lot too, is, like at some point the victim will be worn down. And, if you think about how, let's say somebody, a police is interrogating a suspect,
Oh,
right?
yes, I've
It's
seen that
usually
on TV.
exactly done over time. They'll ask repeated questions over and over. They'll maybe put a little bit of blame. Well, you told me this, now you're telling me this. And the whole point of like just gaslighting and going around in circles and kind of like repeating these things is to wear the victim out. And in psychology, that's kind of called ego depletion, right? After hours and hours of this, you are
Okay,
going to be depleted, and you're more likely to just comply, right?
okay.
You're just more likely to just do what they want because you just want to get this over with,
So
because you're just
is that I talked to a victim and it wasn't of a pig butchering scam. It was of one of a tech support
Mhm.
where they were putting money into her account, the whole refund thing. And then it was, they put too many zeros and all that stuff. And she made a comment. She said, it was as if they took over my brain. Is that kind of the same thing? Is they're trying to control how you think and act?
Yeah, like I think it really depends on a scam, and it depends on what they are doing. But yeah, definitely. I think, there are tons of different scams playing upon different things,
Right.
So like I think another thing that people need to understand, just because you wouldn't fall for this scam, you may fall for another scam that's
True.
more closer to who you are and what you're doing
True.
in life right now.
Right.
So,
It's
definitely.
situational.
Exactly. Definitely they I think in a lot of these frauds, and especially with this like support, this fear, right? Like
Mhm.
when
Yeah.
they evoke these strong emotions such as fear, such as like sexual attraction, or
Mhm.
strong emotions of love, any kind of strong emotion. Fear is very potent one. Fear is a primal thing that
Yes.
is, you go into fight or flight mode,
Exactly,
right?
fight or flight.
Exactly. And you don't think clearly. And what's
Exactly.
important to realize that under such strong visceral influence, that strong kind of emotion, whether it be panic, fear, greed, or whatever, we don't recall advice that we are conscious of. We cannot recall a lot of these rational things that we know.
Okay.
So we don't make decisions that we would make in a cold light of the day, right?
Right.
And this is why, like the hindsight is 2020, right?
Right. Exactly.
It's easy to give advice when you're in a rational state, but not so easy to actually follow that same advice when you're in this, like what some
Emotional state.
psychologists called hot state, right? Like you're kind of
Right.
panicked, you don't know what you're doing, you're making quick
Right.
decisions, you just want to get out of this uncomfortable
Right.
situation.
And that's the same in the pig butchering, right? They're getting you anxious. They're going on your
Yes,
anxiety and
yes,
your need to want to defend yourself
yes,
and that's all emotion too, right?
yes,
Because you're
and
not,
fear as well.
thinking rationally, you might think, well, I don't really even know this person and what do I care what they think of me, right? You just yeah. So that's interesting. And a lot of the scams like we talked about in the beginning, are urgent, right? From the time you engage to when you give the money, it's a matter of hours. But like with the romance scam and then this pig butchering one, there's no like set time frame. It's kind of all based on the conversation until they feel they've got you in basically under their control, and then they start bringing all of this out, and I think you mentioned before about they have a profile on you, but you probably not even talking to the same person all of the time. um, I think that's also a misconception. I think a lot of people think, that the scams are just one individual sitting there, trying to scam them and them only, but they probably have 10 or 20 other people
Yes,
they're engaging with and trying to get them to do this investment as well. And it's a big like call center type
yes.
thing, right? With multiple people and I'm sure that they use a whatever you call it, where you change your voice. So no matter
Mhm.
who's talking to you, it's always the same voice.
It
Because
depends.
do you think somebody would realize that if all of a sudden it was a different voice they were talking to?
So like it depends what you mean by voice. Like if you mean by like a way of speaking through text, because a lot of these scams are just through text. So a
Oh,
scammer
that's
may
true.
say, yeah. So a scammer may
That's
say
true.
like,
Yeah,
yeah, like, I can call you
this is
right
all
now.
done through text, right?
Exactly. But
Yeah,
now with AI, they can easily fake all of that.
yeah.
Sometimes they record voice messages. So they'll record voice message and send you a voice message and say, "Hey, I can't talk now, but here's a voice message." So
Oh,
it's
okay.
almost like talking on a phone. But I have caught, when I try to communicate with the scammer just to see how it evolves. One of the things that I've noticed is that, and I was testing them.
Yeah.
I would get angry if a scammer would like start talking about investment. I would say, "Look, I don't know why you're talking about that now, because like I have my own drama at home, and like I don't want to talk about it." I would get angry, and then suddenly somebody else would come and text much kinder things and much more sophisticated, and the English was better.
Oh,
So I do think that there are handlers, right? And this is typical, in a like old fashioned financial scams. Usually you would have a person who would contact you over the phone and handle you, right? Like this would be the seller, as somebody to
right.
persuade you to invest in this kind of share, this kind of business, whatever it was.
And then
And
you'd get
then when
passed
you
off to somebody
exactly.
else.
And then when you start asking questions and you're suspicious, they don't want to be detected. So now you get put in touch with somebody who's smarter, who will appease you, who becomes your friend. It becomes
Okay,
more difficult to report because now you're friends with this person. That person is just there to manage you, right?
got
And
it.
so I think like there is like, I don't know. This is kind of what I've noticed and what I think happens. But I think there is some degree of that when they think they're going to lose the victim.
Uh,
Maybe it get escalated to somebody who is better at handling, because you need to think about it this way, right? For like months and months and months, you're just carrying on really frequent mundane conversations, right? Like if I'm, let's say, a CEO of scamming operations, my time is limited. I'm super good, but like my time is limited.
right.
I think like there's a lot that they outsource to people who are just carrying on several conversations. And these people, like one thing that I want to also highlight, these people are also scammed. A lot of the times, these people are, human trafficking victims that have
Right.
applied to work in IT and get the passports taken away. There's a great article by ProPublica. They did a really good investigative journalist piece on this scam. Really kind of organized crime gangs that
Right.
actually, the people who are texting you are also victims in some way.
Right, right. Yeah, I've heard about that. I'm gonna have to find that ProPublica article and read through that, because it is interesting, right? A lot of times I think we think people are choosing to do this,
Yes.
and they're not. They're
Yeah.
being it's forced labor. And actually, I don't know if I was reading an article or something or listening to maybe watching a video where the scammer just broke down and said, yeah, I don't want to do this. I'm being forced to do this. Right. And was apologetic and stuff like that. So
No, definitely. That's a big problem because there's a lot of money, right? Like when you think about
absolutely.
any scams that, like you mentioned something earlier that was really interesting that, there's urgency, but there's no urgency here. Well, they're two different scams, right? Urgency typically happens with like phishing scams or like quick scams where you're asking a victim to make a decision in a moment. And there's a reason for that because when you evoke a visceral influence such as fear, such as strong emotion or excitement, let's say free prize, lottery win, or
Right.
whatever,
Right.
these feelings are fleeting. Your rationality will return very quickly.
Very
Yeah.
quickly.
So they have to use urgency so that you make a decision while you're still under this visceral influence. Whereas like big butchering scams or long-term romance scams, they are actually using a different technique. It's not about evoking these quick things. It's about you gaining trust of the
Right.
victim so that the victim thinks you have their best interest at heart and they trust you and they want to listen to you, and then you're manipulating them if they don't want to comply on their own. There's threats or there's like, like what I said, that they withdraw from the conversation. So even though they didn't tell you, well, if you don't invest, I'm gonna stop talking to you, they are telling you this in a less obvious way, right? By
Right.
withdrawing their
So
uh,
that's the I think that process is called grooming.
yeah,
They're in essence grooming you,
yeah,
your brain
yeah,
to feel and to act in a certain way. And like you
yeah,
said, it's that trust, that absolute
yeah,
trust. You're not talking to anybody else about this. You only believe what they're telling you.
yeah.
I've talked to quite a few family members of people that were actively involved in a romance scam, whether it went into the pig butchering or not, but they had just presented it as a romance
Mhm,
scam. Um, and they're just at their wits' end. They've tried talking to them about it, explaining it. They've had the police over to talk to them,
mhm.
and they don't believe it. This person is who they are. They have this relationship. They trust them wholeheartedly, and it's sad that it ends up ruining family relationships. And
Yes.
they've said, what can I do? Is there anything else I can do to help to break through that trust? Do you have any suggestions with that?
Yeah, I think, one thing that we do as humans, and everybody's guilty of that, we like to be preachy and give advice, whether
Whether
somebody
it's
wants
asked
our
for or
advice.
not.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of the times, like I said, when you're in this rational state, you can see all of the warning signs, you can see all of the problems, right? And, I often say to people, remember the time when you were giving your friend advice when they were seeing a person that wasn't good for them and they weren't listening, and then
Mhm.
there were times when that same friend was giving you the same advice when you were seeing them. So I think it's like it's human for us to kind of like be rational sometimes, but we forget that what was difficult for us in that irrational state is also difficult for somebody else, right? And
Right.
like you mentioned, the scammer kind of like tells them, and they believe everything the scammer is saying. Again, you have to understand, scammer didn't just tell them, don't trust your family in one
Right.
text. This was subliminally given to you by the scammer over course of months, right? At first, it'll be something like, well, I know I love you, but like most people wouldn't understand why we can fall in love this quickly. I
Mm.
know I was talking to my family, and my family didn't understand. Your family probably wouldn't understand either, but I know that I want to spend my life with you. So by the time the families intervene, the scammer has already prepared the victim that this is coming.
Yeah, that's true. Right. Your
Yeah,
family's not going to understand,
exactly.
right? They're going to
Yeah,
have all these questions, and they
exactly.
very well are going to be able to anticipate the questions, and they're
Yes.
already going to have given answers,
Yes,
right?
and then I think one of the things that people make really, one mistake that people make, and I see a lot of fraud prevention specialists do that. They come across very authoritarian, so they're like, "Don't panic. Why would you do this? Don't click this. Stop sending money."
Yeah.
Like those are all things like that are very simplistic. Just because you tell somebody not to do something, it's not going to
Doesn't
make
mean
it.
they're going to do it.
Exactly.
Right.
So I think like there needs to be more empathy, coming from the place of empathy rather than giving advice. So asking questions like what's great about this relationship? Like tell
Mhm.
me what do you see in this person? What are they giving you?
Mhm.
Like I think sometimes you need to think about it as well in terms of like almost like psychotherapy, right? When you go to a psychotherapist, they don't talk. They may ask a question and you will talk,
And
and
they
through
listen.
and they'll listen, but through that, from asking a question and you telling them, you are also listening to yourself, and that is the quickest way to realize something. It's not, there's a stubbornness in us. We don't like to listen to advice, right? Like, and
Right.
so it's kind of really difficult. I would say it's very difficult, but I think more empathy is needed when you're handling your family members. And I would also say this too, a lot of the times when this is happening to elderly people, there may be other issues at play, such as, early onset of dementia, or some kind of cognitive problems that make them difficult to reason, or make them more vulnerable to threats, or make them more vulnerable to manipulation, that I think perhaps needs like medical
Oh,
intervention of some sort.
right. To have some sort of testing run and stuff like that. Right.
Just to
Yeah.
like, I'm not saying that everybody, because like there are perfectly fine,
Right.
fully functioning adults engaging in scams over and over. Sometimes it's a choice, and sometimes you're not going to be able to persuade them.
Yeah. Yeah. I've in my personal experience, right, with the romance scam with a loved one, you know, I immediately got upset and angry. And it wasn't geared towards my loved one, it was geared towards the scammer, right? It
Mhm.
was, how could you do this? How could you manipulate, someone like this that was grieving the loss of their spouse and all of this? But that comes across to your
Mhm.
loved one,
Yes.
I think, is that while you're saying you're not angry at
Mhm.
them, you're angry at the situation, but they are involved in the situation. So it all comes back of as then they're angry with me. And they're going to
Yes.
be less apt to want to talk about it, to want to give you information about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, you mentioned asking questions,
Yeah.
right? That's a great way to get them to think. And that phrase, "you were given one mouth and two ears," right, makes sense. Is ask the question and then just sit back and listen. Because one of the things, we tell people, like in our 3 top tips we give them for scams, is to make sure you have a trusted person that you can talk to before
Yes.
you act on anything. Because sometimes when you hear yourself say it out loud, your brain switches and all of a sudden you're going, "That doesn't make sense." And
Mm.
you kind of figure it out, right? I think
Yes.
your brain
Yeah.
goes into that rational
Yeah.
thinking, but other times you're just really in that emotional state, and it takes your trusted person to start asking questions and to kind of help you navigate through it.
No,
So,
definitely. And one thing you said, like when, you had anger towards the scammer and that comes across then as if you're
yes.
angry towards your family member, you also need to think about like this person has built trust and love in, in your family member. So now
Mhm.
you're criticizing their loved one. To you, this is a nobody, right? This is somebody
Right.
across the Atlantic or whatever. They telling the person they are currently residing and they can't meet. But like to your loved one, this is a person that they plan future with and they picture the future with. So you criticizing somebody they love, right?
That's
So
true.
the same thing, the same love you have for your family member, that person has for the scammer in that moment, right?
That
And
makes
so
sense.
this is how scammers really weaponize like what we hold dear against us, right? It's like it's really sinister. So I think like this is where I think coming with that authoritarian kind of like a demeanor
Right.
actually makes it worse,
Yeah.
and it reinforces what the scammer was telling them, that you're not going to understand, that
Right. Right. Yeah. And that's one of the things I try to talk to people about is, don't go about it in a negative way. Like, don't transfer money. Don't put money into a crypto machine. Don't click on that link. Don't do this. I said, at some point, and I think it's going to happen pretty quickly, your loved one in their mind is going to go, I feel like I'm in kindergarten again. I've been there, done that. I'm an adult. I can make my
Yes.
own they're gonna get very defensive. I
Yeah.
can make my own decisions, right? And when you come back at it, when you come back, you're not meaning to be negative, but just the
Mhm.
words that you're using, the don't and the don't and the don't and the don't, kind of sounds like being in kindergarten, right? When you're trying to learn, or preschool, all of those social norms and things like that.
Yeah.
So
And even then, as a child, you didn't listen.
exactly.
When like people will want to do the thing you tell them not to do, right? Like they'll be like, why can't I do it,
Well,
and so a lot of this advice as well happens, like I think people are unable to explain why, or unable to reason it, and they just know it's wrong, right? And so I'd say, this is why I say any prevention is better than intervention,
yes.
because it's really difficult to intervene, especially in these scams that are very long lasting. You're not even going to know by the time you will intervene, because you've noticed something, the scammer has already replaced the belief system and has
Mm,
accounted for anything you're gonna try and do.
yeah.
But I
Yeah,
like
and
the
that's
idea of the trusted person. I think
yeah,
like this is a preventative measure, right? Like you
right.
putting that person as your guardian before something happens.
Exactly, right? And that's the whole thing is, right, is having a plan.
Yes.
And part of the way, you can plan for, a lot of different things to get notified if things somebody takes over your identity right, so then you have a plan in place as to how you're going to navigate it. If your credit card gets compromised, what you're going to do there. But just with some of the scams and the romance and the pig butchering and stuff like that are scams, that it's like what I think what you can do to protect yourself and your loved ones is you put scam discussions in regular conversation,
Hmm.
right?
That's
Because as the loved one, you're going to be in contact with your older loved one more and
yeah.
more frequently, whether it's on FaceTime, on the phone, in person, whatever. And just Google romance scam. y- Sign up for our newsletters, and you can get information on different scams, or follow
Yeah.
us on social media, and just for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, start the conversation and say, wow, did
Yeah.
you see this article? This lady lost $500,000. She was in a romance scam and she had to sell her house. And, just start talking about it, right?
Absolutely.
Because I think what that does is the reoccurring conversations, and non-defensive, non-threatening, you know, um, helps keep scam prevention
Yeah.
top of mind. So when that older loved one does get contacted, I think they would be more apt to then think scam, um, if
Yes,
if they've had continual
yes,
conversations,
yes.
about it.
Absolutely. And, as humans, we learn through stories, right? So this
Right,
is why I say to people, constantly share, even if the police didn't do anything, share your story. First of
right.
all, with stigmatizing being a victim of fraud, because I think, like, in this day and age, everybody has been defrauded. Probably, maybe you're
Yeah,
not aware of it. Maybe you're
exactly.
given to a GoFundMe campaign that was fraudulent and you don't even
Right.
know it, right?
Exactly.
So, I think, like, the more we talk about it, the more we normalize talking about it, the less likely it is that people are going to fall for it because they recognize some elements of it. So
Mhm.
I think that's a really important aspect. And I think definitely people think it wouldn't happen to them until it does, right? And
Exactly.
so, like, the way we rationalize things, it's like, well, my parents are like perfectly functional human beings, it wouldn't
Mhm.
happen to them. My
Right.
friends, it doesn't matter, right? Like,
Right.
everybody, I know people with PhDs who fell for
Yep.
scams. I know people who are CEOs who fell for scams.
Yep.
There's, I don't think there's a parallel between intelligence, but
No.
people make these
Th
parallels, and it gives them this, like, almost false sense of security that it wouldn't
Yes.
happen to them. And I think we first thing we need to understand, it's like scams are like advertisements, right? Like, some advertisements don't appeal to us. We are, blind to them. But
Right.
then there'll be that one pair of jeans that looks really good and you'll click on,
Right.
right? It's like just to see what it's about and and the same with scams, right? Like, it's just because you didn't do anything about this, like, 100 scams you got in your inbox because they weren't very convincing, doesn't matter, like, doesn't mean you're not going to fall for
Right.
something
That
else.
101 that
Yes.
came
Yeah.
into your inbox, you
Yeah.
might engage with that one, right?
So just knowing what's happening, knowing how they persuade, understanding that it can happen to anyone. So,
Yep.
like, you more on your guard.
Oh, yeah, I've talked to somebody who, does the Google My Business for other companies, and so he's on Google all the time, and he fell for a scam, right? Somebody else that is one of the top level people in cybersecurity fell for something, right? It happens.
Yeah, it happens.
We're not always at the top of our game, we're not always sitting there just waiting to be scammed so we can see it and not fall for it, right?
Yeah.
Scammers have an innate ability to catch us at the wrong time,
I mean,
right?
is that, and also some scams are so convincing, there's no
Mhm.
telling them from genuine stuff,
Yeah,
right? So, just accept that too. So, like, if you look at the legitimate emails that your bank sends, very similar to what scammers is now saying,
right.
sending. And with the generative AI, they're just getting better and better in terms of spelling. They no longer have
Exactly,
spelling.
grammar.
Exactly. So it's going to be really difficult to tell. Emails can be spoofed. We're told to hover over things. Sure,
Right.
that'll save you in, let's say, 95%. In the 5% where a scammer is very good, the email will be spoofed. It'll look exactly, the email
It'll
is
look
going to look.
exactly right. Yeah. And same thing with phone numbers now, right? I
Yes.
had somebody on my advisory board has this app and she has it because she wants to know she's in cybersecurity, how it works and all that stuff, but you can plug in um the phone number that you're calling from and it doesn't have to be yours and
Mm,
plug the phone number that you're calling
yeah.
to and that's not right.
Yeah. Yeah.
She did it with me. She plugged my number into call, but she plugged someone else's number in as who it was coming from, and sure enough, it came through with that person's
Mhm.
name and phone number, right? So, phone numbers can be spoofed now, right?
Absolutely.
And
Anything can be
so
spoofed. Yeah.
yeah,
So I think, like, this is why it's important to also just warn people how scams are going to make them feel. Anything that's making you panic, anything that's making you excited, anything that doesn't feel good, I think just talk to somebody about it,
yeah,
because I think like once you talk to somebody about it, like you can start rationalizing it,
Right.
too. Because I think a lot of the times in these long-term scams, you get into that movie, and all is this, and
Mm-hmm.
I think that's kind of how a scammer can actually get in and become the most important thing in your life, right?
Right.
So I think it's
Right.
really important to share things with friends and family uh,
Absolutely.
at early stages.
Yeah, absolutely. That's an awesome point. Wow, we've already gone through 50 minutes. That went quick. But lots of great
Yeah,
information, and I'll put the link to the case study that you did, and the name of your book and everything in the notes when
perfect.
it comes out, for that. But thank you so much, Martina, for taking
You're
the
welcome.
time, sharing all of your information. I definitely want to have you back in the next couple months. We can talk about another subject. You're just a wealth of information.
Sounds good. Thank you
All
for
right.
having me.
All right. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. All right, guys. So that's a lot of information about pig butchering scams and different psychological techniques involved in it: commitment, consistency, just different vulnerability, persuasion techniques. Just remember, the most important thing is to be that trusted person in your loved one's life that they can come and talk to you about any situation, and have regular conversations about different scams and different techniques and things like that in a non-defensive, non-threatening way. Just weave it into conversations just to keep scams top of mind. And don't forget, you're going to want to get onto our website, roseadvocacy.org. You can find more resources there. You can, at the bottom, use the contact us button if you want to give us an idea of something you want us to talk about. We can see if we can get it in on a future episode. You'll find our social media links, and you can also sign up for our emailed and or mailed newsletter. And don't forget the events tab. We have our 3rd annual golf tournament coming up on Friday, April 11th at Arizona Grand Resort and Spa. It's a Friday morning. We're still looking for sponsors, golfers, volunteers, and auction items. So all the information's there. The link to the website is there. Hit us up if you've got any of these. We'd love to have you out for golf or sponsor. And join us next week on Let's Talk About Scams. Thank you.
Well, that's all the knowledge for this episode. Tune in every Tuesday at 8 a.m. Pacific Time on K4HD Radio at k4hd.com as Joyce explores a variety of knowledge so you have the power to make scam protection your healthy habit. And until then, feel free to reach out to Joyce and let's talk about scams.